Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Welcome back to another Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. And if you go to pre-scribe.com, that's where we have all of our podcasts. And of course, you can find them wherever you find the podcasts or wherever you download podcasts. But this is the series on censorship. This is where we're diving behind the scenes of medicine and bringing in experts, people that have actually experienced censorship in the world of medicine. And we're going to let them tell their stories, but also bring you into the real time of what's happening on the ground in medicine, not just focusing on problems, but learning from these pioneers, from these brave people, and actually talk about solutions moving forward. One of the questions that really prompted me to create this series on censorship was people asking me, why do more doctors not speak out? The first time I heard that question, I thought it was a little baffling. Basically, what it told me is that patients felt alone. They felt that doctors were not out being their advocates, being there to lead the way for them. Just a few reasons. I think number one, clearly fear. I think fear paralyzes most people. Doctors are not excluded from that. Lack of courage, lack of leadership. Now, I'm going to present our guest in just a moment. These three categories, these three criteria, characteristics, you're going to find that they embody him. So just a real quick quote here from Billy Graham. Courage is contagious. When a brave man takes a stand, the spines of others are often stiffened. So just a reminder on the word censorship. It's two words. Remember, censor. Root origin word back to the 16th century Rome, census and purview of public manners and morals. So no real negative connotation there, but in Latin, censor means to evaluate, appraise, judge, speak, solemnly, proclaim. 16th century English, official judgment of morals and conduct. Now we're getting into control. 17th century, empowered officials to determine if anything is immoral or heretical in books, films, plays. Hitler used this strategy. 19th century, state agent charged with suppression of speech or narrative deemed counter to the approved political narrative. And that last word, ship, the suffix is powered office or position. So we're bringing in a guest today, Dr. Stephen Hotze, who really can speak to many aspects of a career of battling for patients, their autonomy in the practice of medicine. But it's not that he's just fought. I believe that he's helped to provide the playbook for solutions to take that quote from Billy Graham and stiffen more spines. I call him a pioneer. He's a leader. You're going to hear his story. He's a brave man. He's a fighter, shows great courage. I think he actually likes the fights, and you'll hear that from him. He's authored many books. 2005, Hormones, Health and Happiness. 2013, Hypothyroidism, Health and Happiness. 2017, Do a 180, Join the Wellness Revolution. And his latest, I believe, 2020, is The Proven Prescriptions for Building a Successful Cash-Based Practice. That's, I think, bringing patients and doctors back together. And I know he's actually working on another book right now. But I think probably what he's going to be most proud of is he's a husband, he's a father, and I call him a friend. Dr. Hotze, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for a generous introduction, Nathan, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here.
Well, I think your leadership on this issue, and you've shown it over the many years, both in the wellness movement, but then I think also in the ability to allow doctors to practice the way it's intended to practice, freedom. and to focus on the patients. Your work there, I think, is as great as your work has been in wellness, Stephen. That work there, I think, is what really sets you apart, because you're not afraid and you don't back down from anybody. There's a quote from one of your books. You cannot poison yourself to good health, and the disease model of medicine, which offers drugs or surgery as a solution, it has failed miserably to improve the health of many Americans. Now, this quote, I think, is really what has driven you in the wellness revolution. Is that correct?
Well, it is, and it really came from my dad. When I graduated from the University of Texas Medical School, July 31st, 1976, my father held a banquet for me at the Houston Club downtown with family and friends. And over dinner, he turned to me and he said, "Son," I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Son, don't poison your patients like all the other doctors do. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a recommendation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. And I looked at him and said, "Yes, sir." And so that planted the seed of what ultimately, 13 years later, gave birth to the Hotze Health and Wellness Center, as I saw in the practice of medicine the detrimental side effects of so many of the drugs that doctors were prescribing to their patients, and that I had prescribed some of those. And I had a little lady come into my office in the spring of 1989, and she was living at a retirement center next door, and she came over, and she was my first patient in the morning, and I said, "Miss Jones, how are you doing?" And she had a big smile on her face. She said, "Dr. Hotze, ever since I threw away all those pills you were giving me, I feel like $1 million." So immediately that harkened back. I heard my dad's voice, "Don't poison your patients like all the other doctors do." And so I thought to myself, she's smarter than me. She's smarter than all the other doctors I know and all the other patients. She understands that these drugs are toxins. And, the first course I took in medical school was pharmacology. And one of the first chapters was detoxification of drugs. Detoxification has its root toxin. To detoxify is to remove toxins. And so it talked about the function of the liver and how the liver detoxifies the very drugs the doctors or the toxins that the doctors are giving the patients, the poisons. And so over time, through a health issue my dad had, and it's a quick story, but I think it's very instructive. My dad had some chest pain back when he was 72 years old, this would have been right after this little lady had told me that she threw away all my drugs, and he had chest pain. Sent him to a cardiologist friend of mine who ultimately said we need to do a study and check out his coronary arteries. And so they did a catheterization, and at that time decided to do angioplasty, and that's where they had a balloon, and they would expand the balloon, hopefully to open up the artery. Well, that blew open his left anterior descending artery, and he had an emergency surgery, heart surgery at that time. And I'm watching the whole thing through the window, watching the EKG, and it went haywire. And I called up my friend, Dr. Robert Feldman. I said, "Robert, he was a cardiovascular surgeon, get over here. They just blew his LAD." And so Dad survived that, thank God. I spent the first night with him in the hospital because that's when most patients die. And sure enough, he was intubated, and he started choking on it, and I had to fix him and suck it out and get all the fluid out so that he could breathe. Anyway, he got home. 2 weeks after he got home, he called me up and said, "Son, come over to my house." I said, "Yes, sir." And he was not in a good mood. He's pacing the floor and he goes, "I don't know what the Sam heck I was letting these doctors invade my body for. By goodness, by golly, I'm an engineer." He was a very successful engineer and entrepreneur with a manufacturing business and the old pipeline business. And he said, "I've got a hardened artery. It's like a pipe. in our gas pipelines. If there's a crack in it and you put pressure on it, it blows, and you can't expand the calcified artery. I don't know what I was thinking. It violated every principle I know. He said, read this. And he gave me a newsletter from Dr. Julian Whitaker, who is a doctor that practiced natural approaches to health in California. And he talked about the incidence of death after a heart attack. If you have angioplasty at this point in 88, 15% of the people died within the first year. If you had bypass surgery, 5% of the people died. If you didn't do anything but get down to an ideal body weight, lower your blood pressure, do some exercise, and take vitamins and minerals, you had a 1% chance of dying. And he said, don't let the doctors invade your body. And my dad turned to me, he said, what do you think about this? I said, Dad, I wish we'd have done this. I didn't know anything about it. He said, well, this doctor says I need to take vitamins. What do I need to take? And I just looked at him like a deer in headlights. I said, Dad, I'm a doctor. What do I know about vitamins? And he said, would you find out? And I said, yes, sir. I was the oldest of 7 boys, and I loved my dad. And, of course, I did that. And my dad started feeding me all kinds of information about vitamins, and I got involved with the Pan American Allergy Society and learned about vitamin and mineral supplementation. And now we have our own business here at the Hotze Health and Wellness Center, Physician's Preference Vitamin Store, which is a multi-million-dollar business in vitamins. So in my dad's adversity, there was a seed of equal or greater benefit in that. And Dad lived another 8 years. He fired all his doctors, and he said, I want you to take care of me. And so I had to take care of my dad. And the night before he died, this goes back to October 31st, 1995, I called him up on the way home from the office at night. I said, Dad, how are you feeling? He said, son, I hadn't felt this good since I was 18 years old. Food hadn't tasted as good. My dad ran 2 miles every day at the age of 80, and he ran in the house, literally 2 miles in the house. He'd run around the house over and over again. And so anyway, he went to work, and he had told me when he was 65, he said, I'll never retire. I'm the patriarch of the family. And he was. He said, I'm gonna if I retire, then I'm sucking off the family. I'm gonna produce for the family. And he did. He was a wonderful provider for all the kids. And he and Mom had 46 grandkids. So 8 kids, 46 grandkids. So anyway, the next day, he dropped dead at the office. He had a heart attack and took him to the hospital. And he died that day. So he didn't linger. I'll guarantee you that. But that's what got me into natural approaches to health. And this goes back 1989. And there were some doctors that were doing natural approaches to health. And I read everything I could, went to all kinds of meetings, learning everything I could from doctors that thought out of the box. By the way, I had a professor during my internship, Dr. Herb Fred, who, when we would have our medical rounds, we'd sit down and make our presentations of the patients we saw in the hospital, and we'd make a statement. He'd say, why is that so? And then you'd try to answer that. He said, oh, really? Why is that so? And after the third why, you realize you didn't know what the heck you were talking about. So he always taught me to question everything. And I questioned, I've always questioned everything. I'm a maverick. So in medical school, I read a book by Thomas Saines, psychiatrist, talked about the myth of mental illness. And as a matter of fact, I read that before I did my psychiatry rotation, and I challenged them, and they failed me at psychiatry. I had to retake it my senior year. And we had a truce. And when I graduated at the banquet, one of the surgery professors came up and said, you know why you graduated, don't you? I said, no. I said, well, the psychiatrist called a meeting and they wanted to kick you out of school, but we all liked you. And there were a bunch of Christian guys that were surgeons. They liked me, and I'd come to know Christ in med school and was fairly evangelical. And so he said, we voted to keep you in. And so that's the reason I ended up in medicine. That's where God wanted me instead of in home building, which was my second choice. So anyway, that once I got into the natural approaches to health, you're going against the grain because the whole system is built around pharmaceutical drugs and insurance and money. And there are protocols that you're expected to follow. And if you're going to be on an insurance program, you've got to follow their protocols. And that's why I've never done insurance. I've never been part of any HMO or PPO. We've decided that we're going to serve we call our patients guests. We're going to serve our guests and give them what they need. So that led up. So as I walked through my career, I learned about allergy treatment from the Pan American Allergy Society, and all these patients that I was treating with all these drugs, antihistamines and bronchodilators and steroids. I found out that I could treat them for allergies and get rid of their allergies. They didn't need all this medication. And we put them on vitamins and minerals. We started treating for yeast because people with allergies invariably get recurrent and chronic infections. And one common thing I heard from women is that, gosh, ever since I started having allergies and taking all these antibiotics, I've got chronic yeast infections. So I read Crook's book on yeast, the yeast connection, and we began treating for yeast. And then a friend of mine who was an OB-GYN allergist, if you can imagine that, our society had a lot of eclectic doctors. Cardiovascular surgeon was an allergist as well. So this doctor said, "You got a lot of women in your practice that have got hypothyroidism." I said, "Really?" "Yep." So we began to check, and sure enough, 28% of the females, 18% of the males had antibodies to their thyroid gland. They had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, autoimmune disease, or autoimmune thyroiditis, this is called. So we began treating for thyroid, and then 4 years later, I learned from Dr. Whitaker, and a guest of ours, patient, taught me about natural female hormones, and I began to do that, natural female hormones. Then I learned from Dr. McJeffries about the use of cortisol. And so our regimen involved treatment of airborne allergies, treatment of food allergies, treatment of yeast, natural thyroid hormone replacement, sex hormone replacement, treatment of adrenal fatigue, vitamin and mineral supplementation, and a nutritionally balanced eating and exercise program to help our guests get on a path of health and wellness, help them get well. So while you're alive, you don't want to be sick while you're alive. You don't want to live a long, sick life. You want to live a long, healthy life. That's called Health Span. That's my next book. About completed that on Health Span. But my first book, you mentioned it, Hormones, Health, and Happiness, I wrote that in 2005. And within 6 months, I had 3 complaints before the Texas Medical Board on my book.
Let me interject real quick, because you've told me this story, and you've just laid it out like we planned this out, and we didn't. So I just want you to know that. This is why I think his life experience, his career experience, is for a reason, and it's to empower you. If you're a doctor, you need to hear it. You need to act upon it. If you're a patient, your doctor's not doing this, you need to let them know. Your father set the stage for you.
He did.
In the wellness movement. He really did. He was a blessing to you. But you didn't just go, "Dad, I'm a doc, I can't." You showed the initiative to learn, but you didn't stop when you were helping patients. You said, "Now I got to tell everybody." And it was that 2005 book that really set the stage for the fight for the rest of your career, which is still ongoing right now, of this censorship battle. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. And so I was going to continue. So I get 3 complaints to the medical board. I've got to spend $100,000 in legal fees defending my book. And I said, "I thought we have a First Amendment right." "Well, we didn't like what you wrote, and it doesn't follow medical protocol, blah, 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 But anyway, I ended up getting it. It was dismissed, and that ended that. And then I had two more complaints after the first one that I fought, and they just dismissed them because I'd already beat them. And then I turned around and sued the medical board several years later. In 2000, I literally sued the medical board because they would not tell you who filed the complaint, and you have a constitutional right to know who your accuser is to be able to defend yourself. And so I sued the medical board. Didn't end up winning ultimately, but I took it to the Fifth Circuit. But after that, basically, they've left me alone. And I've been very outspoken all the way, on natural approaches to health. And then when the COVID pandemic came around and the mRNA clot shot and all that came around, we were adamantly opposed to that. And look, I'm a Christian, so we ask God to hedge his angels and protect our practice. We've got 4 enterprises here, and we have 70 on staff. And it's, to stand up, it's going to cost, it can cost you. But because they knew that I was very active politically and and I didn't back down and stood up, they have left me alone. They go after when you go after prey, if you're an animal, you're going to go after the weak link. You're not going to go after the big and strong. If you're a lion, you're going to try to get the baby giraffes. You're not going out, you're going to go get the little ones. That's who you want to get because they're easy pickings instead of the big, strong animals. And that's the same way it is with with those that are in authority and tyranny. There's a verse in the Bible says, the wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So you got to be bold. And by being bold, it's like when the old adage, a bully comes up, the best way to stop a bully is punch him right in the nose. He'll leave you alone. He's going to go find somebody else to pick on. So that's the way that's been my approach. I first and foremost, we trust God as our sovereign. I've gone through a whole lot because I'm politically active. I've been very strongly interested in election integrity. And we found in Harris County alone, which is the seat of Houston, Texas, that there were over 600,000 illegal names on the voter file out of 2.6 million, of which 205,000 were shown as voting, and they don't live in the county. So how did this happen? And so they're stealing elections. And because I was on top of it and the Democrats are doing this, they ended up, I hired private investigators to look into all this. I had 40 of them working it for one time looking into it. And one of them got into some trouble, and because he worked for me, or he had an incident, and because he worked for me, they ended up bringing in an indictment against me for something I didn't even know that occurred. So I'm fighting on the legal front, then I get sued by the individual. So I've got all these different fronts that we're fighting on. And then we turned around and sued the county on all these illegal names. We got a lawsuit going forward on that. We also, during the COVID epidemic, I sued the governor, who's a Republican, the lieutenant governor, the county judge, who's a Democrat, the county clerk, and I sued. And the reason I sued the county judge is that she had an order that every business had to require all their customers to wear masks. Well, I had a sign on my door that said no, mask-free zone, no mask required, and I sued over that law. And so I went to court here in Harris County, which is all controlled by the Democrats, and they threw my case out because they said, you've never been fined, so you don't have standing. Well, the law's there. Do I have to have a penalty and be arraigned in court and indicted before I have a right to sue that the law is unconstitutional? But they didn't want to mess with me because they knew I would fight them all the way to the Supreme Court. So they just dismissed the case and said you can't bring a case until they finally fine you, which they never did, because they knew why would they be back in court. So that's the way you stand up. That's the way you stand up against tyrannical government. You just stand up and say, we're not going to put up with this. It's wrong. We went online. I did it when the COVID injection is not a vaccine, as you all know. It's a gene modifying shot. It's dangerous as it could be. It causes your body to produce the very things that the virus produced. And why would you want to produce it in your own body? You fight it off with just natural immunity. And it probably was, in most cases, it was probably just the flu that was getting named COVID. The PCR tests, you may or may not know, and Nathan, they were totally bogus tests. They were never meant to diagnose any infected disease. The guy that won the Nobel Prize, who devised it back in 1992, said this was never meant to diagnose an infection. Right. It just shows that you have viruses in your body, and everybody's going to have it. So the way they ended up running these tests, they'd have a 95% positive rate. They had everybody half scared to death, that they're going to die. And turns out for the 10 years prior to 2021, for 10 years prior to that, there were 30 to 35 million flu cases in America. In 2021, there were 1,600 cases of the flu. Where did the flu go? And it came back the next year. Where did it go? Well, the flu is getting diagnosed as COVID. That's what was happening. So,
well, basically,
that's my background. But what I want to talk about is this whole censorship that is going on, and how it happened, and how the government got involved in this. So, and I know this through a lawsuit that was filed by the state of Texas against the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. And this was filed in 2023. Well, here's the background on it. Back in 2011, Congress passed a bill that allowed for an agency under the authority of the Department of State to counter terrorism, and it was called the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communication, CSCC. And it was to counter propaganda from foreign countries and any disinformation. That's what it was established to do. And then in 2006, now this is during the administration of Obama. Then in 2016, by executive order, he changed the name to Global Engagement Center. And its purpose was to evaluate any foreign powers and any propaganda or disinformation that they were bringing into the United States, and to fight that, which seems reasonable. But it morphed. All of a sudden, they began to use it against Americans online. Remember, right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of Americans use social media to gather news. At some point, they're getting their news either from Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. All these, they're getting information. And so much of the information, which is counter to the mainstream media information, it gives people like you and me to put out our voice, what we think and what we believe is going on. Well, the government doesn't like anybody challenging their narrative. And the people in charge, which I believe are Marxist communists in their philosophy, they want to have totalitarian and authoritarian control over the thoughts. They have a party line, and they want that party line to be kept. And if anybody challenges it, they want to get rid of it. So behind the scenes, now this is under the Department of State. They had the Global Engagement Center, and the Global Engagement Center decided we're going to start to use this to evaluate propaganda and disinformation online on the various search engines and the various websites where people are giving counter information to our narrative, whether it was counter information, what's going on in Ukraine, going on at the border, going on in health, going on with the COVID pandemic. Anybody that was taking an opposite view and publishing it, they said, we got to stop this. And so what they did, and they're forbidden by law to impinge the First Amendment right, which, by the way, says that we have the First Amendment right says freedom of speech cannot be abridged, and freedom of the press cannot be abridged by the government. The government can't do that. Our founding fathers wrote this in the Constitution because they had lived under English rule, and the English were censoring them for anybody that had any ideas or publishing any papers that were that were contrary to the English point of view. Well, so that's why it's in the Constitution. It's the First Amendment. It's got to be pretty important if it's number one: freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So they immediately in 2016, after Obama switched the name to Global Engagement Center, and money was appropriated by Congress to be able to block disinformation from foreigners, they began to use the money to downrank, block, to point at people that they considered disinformation or lies online. And because they couldn't do it legally as a government organization, they had other groups. People that worked for them left and formed other organizations that they funded. The government would fund these organizations to go online and come up with a list. They call it a global disinformation list, where they would have a dynamic exclusion list. And so a group was formed called Park Cloud, also known as Disinfo Cloud, Park Advisors Disinfo Cloud. They were funded with millions of dollars. And they went online and they created a whole list of things that they considered disinformation that was coming out online in social media. And what they did is they wrote the people that had the various sites like Facebook and X, which was Twitter at the time, and all the others, Instagram, and they wrote them and said, and this is the private organization that's getting funded by the government, and they were using it. It was basically an alter ego, and they were telling the people, here's what you need to clean off your line. And then they wrote the advertisers, people that advertised online, and most people don't know it. There was a big cottage industry of individuals when the computers came out, that they would publish online pieces, a number of different organizations, everybody from Newsmax to New York Post, and all kinds of organizations would publish their information online. And if they had a good following, the advertisers would buy it onto that, and they received income. And I had a friend of mine, he was making $10 million a year. Now, I'm not saying this is total profit, but he was generating $10 million a year until they came out with this. And he had no idea, and I had no idea about this global engagement center that formed these other companies to send out to the advertisers and said, it's not good for you to advertise on that website because they're giving disinformation and they're lying. And all of a sudden, my friend's revenue collapsed in 1 year from $10 million to $1 million. They downrank anybody, and maybe on your site or my site, we never did have it on there to make money and to get advertisers, even though people would advertise there. They would take anybody that didn't follow the narrative and they would downrank them. They would turn down the volume. They have algorithms. They know who's watching what and what's popular. And so if it's against their narrative, they just take the volume and they turn it down so you don't go out to all your people.
Hey, Stephen,
and we do this in my practice because we do natural approaches to health. There are certain words that if we say, they will black. What was one of the words that we had?
COVID. You said
if we promoted treatment of COVID online, Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, boom. I got knocked off Facebook in 2020 and see what they do is they want to demonetize, deplatform, and censor anybody that has a contrary view of the current narrative given by those in power. And those in power would be not only the politicians and not only the government, but colleges, medical institutions, insurance companies, all the big corporations. They were told, and they could go online. They were sent information where they could go online, and there was a group called the Countering Propaganda Disinformation, CPD. They could go on there and they could look and they could see all the different things that were disapproved by the government, and they were encouraged by these private groups who were paid by the government to don't allow these people on your platform. So we got deplatformed and down-regulated, downright. And that's what happened. And that's why once that happens, they want to do everything to block the truth. And there's nothing better than the truth. And there's nothing better than open debate. That's how societies grow. You have open debate about a subject or a topic or a medical procedure. Is it good? Is it bad? You and I don't remember, but back in the old days when George Washington died with leeches on his body.
Yeah.
So that was the standard of care.
Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, he admitted to this, that the influence of the government on this private platform to then censor words, not just words, but it was thought, right? And you're right. Science is the open debate and discussion of ideas. And it's really interesting because you laid out a timeline beautifully there, Steve, about how this started before the pandemic. So it's like the road was laid, if you will. But it was to be able to control the thought and the narrative. And so the very words that we would speak on behalf of our patients. So you said COVID. Well, what about turbo cancer?
Right.
That is a phrase. We're just describing what we see. And they say, and they throttle you on social media for this right now. But turbo is just describing what you see. But if you look through the literature, they talk about turbocharging T cells, turbocharging the immune system, turbocharging conventional immunotherapy. So the point here is you early on, because of your father's, I think, just spark, taught you to think outside the box and question everything. And that's driven you through your career. But what it's also done is caused you to challenge those in power. And history is very clear. Those in power, when they say the victors write history, I would say those in power write the algorithm, okay? And you have made a pattern of questioning power, which you were doing on behalf of patients and doctors. So you were approaching it from a good perspective. But what they've done is they've gone on the attack, not just your words, but they've actually, they've gone after you.
Right.
They've gone after.
And part of that, they do that. If they want to go after high-profile people, when I think I've been under attack, and I have, but I look at Trump, and my gosh, that man has got chutzpahs. I'm telling you what, man, he's stronger than horseradish. That he stood. Can you imagine having to stand up against that and then getting shot at and about to get your ear blown off, and he's still standing strong? That says a lot for him. We need to be praying that God would hedge his angels about him and protect him, keep him strong, help him. I hope this caused him to have a real deep conversion and trust in God, and I believe it has. I pray that for him every day. But can you imagine what he went through? But there are people all over the country. There's Mary Bowden in Houston. I know a number of doctors. Paul, with the doctors, Pierre Corey, Paul Merrick, Sherry Tenpenny, Mercola. All these doctors around the country have been targeted by their various medical boards. Blanche Gruby, because she's a dentist that does biological dentistry, just got her license taken away after practicing the principles of Hal Huggins, the dentist, for 40 years. She'd been doing it, and all of a sudden they said, because she's taking out mercury amalgams out of the teeth, they don't believe they should be doing that, and so they took her license away. Literally, this was a year ago, and she's fighting it in federal court. But what this does is when people hear about it, and you were talking about why won't doctors take a stand? Well, there are two reasons. Well, it may be three reasons. One, they're cowards. They're just cowards, and they don't want to. Second, they have a pecuniary interest, a financial interest in that. They could be deplatformed. Most of them are taking insurance, and if they don't follow the current narrative in medicine, they're going to be their insurance. They're not going to be on the insurance platform because they are working for the insurance company and not for their patients.
Advocacy.
And the third reason is that they see other doctors who have taken a stand in what's happened to them, and they don't want that to happen to them. They know that could cost them their financial future, could cost them their medical license. So,
which I think it's perfect that, it was actually Billy Graham that said, courage is contagious. And that's what, it's why I wanted you on here, because you have to understand what Dr. Hotze has displayed here is that when they go on the attack to censor your voice, they're looking to take you off the playing field completely.
right.
Now, that just means your ability to even speak. Not that they take your voice away, but they do so digitally. They do so through attacking the words, the author. And it says, when a brave man takes a stand, the spine of others are often stiffened. But what you showed in your career is that it's an ongoing battle that has really only increased in its attack. But I think, I'm a Christian too, and I talk about that all the time, but there are what are called sins of omission and sins of commission. And so some of these are direct attacks on you, but some of them are indirect, where basically if they take your words away, so direct, that's taking your words away, you can't publish. They deplatform you, they throttle you, or they label you as alternative. The phrase there is quack. So they don't directly take your words away, but they marginalize your words.
Right.
And in so doing, make your words have no value. Sir William Osler, many would call the father of modern medicine, said the greater the ignorance, the greater the dogmatism.
That's sure true, isn't it?
People like you,
in your career.
Right? People like you, Stephen, you know this because I love you. You're a dear friend. You just have shown such great leadership and bravery. That's why I wanted you to tell your story, because there's a lot of cowards, but maybe those cowards can show a stiff spine because they're out to make people ignorant so that their narrative, dogmatism, is what is set forth.
Well, that's right. And they don't want to, what they don't want to do, and I'm talking about the politicians and and big pharma, the medical industrial complex, the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the hospitals, they don't want to kill the goose that's laying their golden egg. And what their golden egg is keeping people chronically sick. And then sicker people they have and get more procedures and more medication. Guess what? It costs the insurance companies more money. They raise their premiums. The hospitals raise their fees. The pharmaceutical companies raise their fees. I'll give you an example of the pharmaceutical industry. I have a guest of ours, patient of ours, who had cancer and was prescribed a medication to go to a pharmacy and get this medication for her cancer. And her husband called up and asked, if they had the prescription ready, and they did. And he said, what's it going to cost? And the pharmacist told him $2,500. And he thought to himself, well, it's my wife and, she needs to have it and whatever it takes, we'll do it. And he said that the pharmacist asked him, what insurance plan will you be using? And he went, oh, no, I'm paying cash for that. And she said, oh, cash? Okay, well, let me see what the cash price is. Mind you, the price she gave him was $2,500. The cash price was, you're not going to believe this, $38. $38. That's a $2,400 discount. Now, that tells you how much money and how the pharmaceutical companies are basically using the current system to absolutely milk the, and so you can say, well, the insurance company may have paid for it, but I guarantee your copay on $2,500, if it's 10%, would have been $250. If it's 20%, would have been $500. And this husband got it for $38. Another one, I checked on a patient of ours on a medication that she was prescribed by another doctor, and told me that it was going to cost $2,000 for a month for this medication. And it was just an enzyme, some digestive enzymes that she had been prescribed, and they wanted $2,000 for it. So I called up my pharmacist here at the office at our pharmacy, and I said, "Can you check and see if we can buy it here and buy it in our pharmacy, and then we could sell it at a much lower price than $2,000 for 100 tablets? Give me a break for digestive enzymes." So she called me back up and said, "I can't believe this." She said, "I called to buy it for a bottle of 100. They wanted at wholesale price $800. I said, "Well, it's cheaper for," and by the way, the husband ended up getting a cash price for $1,400 on the $2,000. I said, "Well, it's cheaper for him to get it the way he got it." And she said, "I can't believe this. When I distributed this, when I worked at Walgreens 10 years ago, the price for this, our retail price was $19 for these enzymes, and now it's $2,000 retail." And that just tells, and they've done the same thing with epinephrine. Epinephrine is as cheap as water. You can buy a 5 or 10 cc vial of that. We have it at our office. In the old days, bought it for less than $10. Now they put it in a syringe, and they call it a, what do they call the syringes that, what is that? Where you get a shot of epinephrine, EpiPen. So it's an EpiPen. For one dose of this, 0.2 cc's in this container, they charge $800. And that, it's just outrageous. And something's got to be done about this. And we hope that Kennedy, when he gets in there, is going to really expose these pharmaceutical companies for the corrupt. We have drug cartels that run our country, and they're not coming from Mexico. They're coming right here in the United States. All the big pharmaceutical companies are absolutely, I think, one, producing drugs that are killing people, and they're charging them an arm and a leg to do it.
I think it's because the system has forgotten, the system of medicine here I'm talking about, the bureaucracy. Because really, your censorship came from individuals, it came from local government, it came from Medical Board of Texas, it came from really, central government of the United States. But, you have fought this battle ongoing, and only as you've continued to fight, your opposition has continued to grow. So how did you, clearly you didn't fight this alone, right? You clearly found people that you could ally with. You found people that you could work with. The AA, what is that association? The American Academy of Physicians and Surgeons.
Yeah, American Academy of Physicians and Surgeons, which is a great conservative free enterprise organization that has fought the government. Their attorney, Andy Schlafly, has been their director of all their legal matters, their legal director for 30 or 40 years, and he's won 10 cases at the federal appellate court level. He's the one that gave doctors the right to opt out of Medicare. It used to be mandated to be in Medicare, and doctors can opt out of Medicare. You say, well, that's not good. These poor people need help. When you're in Medicare, let me tell you what, they pay a pittance, and they tell you what to do. The government's going to tell you what. You open yourself up for all kinds of problems if your doctor's in a Medicare program. It's just a bad deal, and doctors shouldn't be forced to do that. If they don't want to do it and their patients don't want to be on Medicare, they want to pay out, they ought to be able to do that. It's supposed to be a free country. And
what I say all the time is, we as physicians, we are advocates for our patients and our patients alone. But what you've given example of here is that the system has basically turned its back on patients and turned itself to self-preservation. And I think that's one of the things that's driven you is your personal advocacy for patients. But in that, there's been an indirect, I think, benefit to empower doctors. But it's because medicine has turned its back on whom it serves, the patient. And it's serving the system that is providing the central narrative. And it's that loop that provides the source of the censorship, that when they find people that are calling out what they're saying, what they're doing, then they don't say, wow, that's a good idea. Let's engage on that. Let's talk about it. It's to seek and destroy.
Well, that's right, because it upsets their business model, which is all about profits. You look, look at this with the COVID mRNA gene modifying injection that was mandated by corporations and governments and institutions across the world. And they had all these vaccines or all these injections were made up a year ahead of time. How were they able to produce billions of them in a month? You know, they didn't even do a proper study. It takes 10 years on a vaccination to get approval. And they got it like that on emergency use authorization. They had it all backlogged. They had billions of these shots already prepared, and they mandated and put them out, and they made literally hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And then they damaged the life of literally millions of people and killed millions of people with these shots and injections. And they still won't admit that, but all the documentation is there. And we had the opportunity. I know you did, I did. We had the opportunity to provide safe medical care for our guests, our patients, when they were sick with the flu or COVID symptoms. We never checked the PCR. We got 5,000 active guests. We had over a 3-year period, 21 through 23, say, or middle of 2020, July through 23. We had, of our 5,000, we had 1,000 of our guests that complained of some flu-like symptom. That's 300 a year on an average, okay? And how did we treat them? We treated them with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, gave them cortisol, had them on a good vitamin program, especially high-dose vitamin D, which I'm a big advocate of. I mean, high-dose vitamin D. We had them on that on zinc. We had them on all the protocol, and we did not have one of our guests of the 1,000 or so that had been sick. Not one of them did we put into the hospital or recommend. When they get, if we caught them quick within the first day or two, they were usually well in 3 or 4 days. If they had let it go for 2 weeks and had bronchitis, then we sent oxygen tanks to their home. We did oxygenators. We did IVs at their home. I told every one of them, don't go to the hospital. They'll give you remdesivir and you won't come out alive. So we didn't have one of our guests that we started treatment on ourselves. We had not one of them go to the hospital. We did have one patient that called us up in distress before we had started treating him. And our doctor recommended he go in and get evaluated because he couldn't breathe. And they put him in the hospital, and his family tried to get him all the stuff we gave him. They wouldn't do it, and he died. But he wasn't on our treatment. Everybody that we had treated. Now, if I could have 1,000 people of our patients or guests, if we could treat them and none of them dies, how did all these other people not be able to do that? They could have done it. It was there. All the documentation was there. They wouldn't try it because the money, the incentive for the hospital was to hospitalize them. The hospitals literally made hundreds of thousands of dollars off dead or people that died of quote unquote COVID.
I got to interject this here because even though we're going long here, I think it's an important discussion because you're already going into it. Is ivermectin was approved by the FDA for human use in 1987. It was originally approved by France, but it was very quickly followed up by approval in the United States. So, you know, on the Saturday Night Live, or not the Saturday Night Live, but those Saturday night comedy shows, they're not funny, but they basically came out and said that, you know, this is a horse dewormer. And, you know, it's 2020, I think, is when they were making those quotes. Could have been 2021. But this drug had already been used for human consumption, of course, for parasitic infection since 1980.
Parasitic diseases, yeah. And millions of people around the world for some parasite in the eye.
And I started using this in cancer, Steve, in 2018. So this off-label use of ivermectin was already growing, was already there. The evidence was already growing about its antiviral activity at the right time, its anti-cancer properties. It was only when the pandemic hit that this war on ivermectin came about, that this drug that was recognized to have really broad effects, all of a sudden the establishment turned on it. So I think it's important for people to understand that ivermectin was kind of that flagship of censorship as a drug. You know, we're talking about censorship of people. You're one of them, and you've showed reach. grit to fight, because what you've also shown is censorship doesn't stop. When you speak the truth, you have to keep doing it. But they went after a drug, an inanimate drug, because it was counter to the narrative. So censorship's just not about words. It's not about people. It can actually be about things like drugs. And that's what I think
right.
what
They
you're pointing.
censored that and hydroxychloroquine. It was it was tragic. Think of all the lives that were lost that could have been saved if they'd gotten the safe treatment. And frankly, the reason they couldn't do that is because if you have a treatment for a disease, you can't mandate an injection, and that enabled them. They knew if there was a treatment for it, they couldn't get emergency use authorization for all the shots that they had already manufactured. And by the way, those shots contain not just mRNA; they contain graphene oxide, hydrogel, nanoparticles, all kinds of chemicals. They're just poison shots. And what we told people: stay as far away from the COVID injections as you would a West Texas rattlesnake, because if it bites you, it's going to kill you. And you know what was interesting? They've done studies on it, and they had different strengths in these various shots. Some of them were 10 times stronger than others. Some of them were blanks. And I think they did that intentionally, because if they'd given everybody the dose they wanted to give them, they would have killed so many people that had been an outroar and a total uproar about it and outrage. So they had to do it slowly, and I'm sure that was all planned. This is all the depopulation plan of the globalists, to get rid of humans and to have transhumans, and basically have all the rich have a bunch of robots running around. Ugh.
But Dr. Hotze,
You got to read this. It sounds crazy, but all you have to do is, look at old movies. They've told you what they're going to do in the movies, and then all you have to do is go and just read some articles on transhumanism and see what their plans are for the future.
well, if people go, well, there's no way that could happen today. I'm sorry, just go back in history. They're just repeating history. History does the same thing over and
over again.
They just try to give it different window dressing, different perspective. Hitler in Nazi Germany did the same thing. I mean, they turned entire groups of people against other groups, the Germans against the Jews. So, I mean, vaccinated against the unvaccinated. So this is the same old playbook. It's not any different. But what I think is important here, Dr. Hotze, is about how you've shown this backbone, this stiff spine. So if you had to give doctors that are maybe wanting to say, I need to be courageous, I need to be brave, or patients that want their doctors to be, what 3 tips would you provide from your history to them to help them, I think, be successful, but understand that it's not a one-time event, and basically how to wade yourself through the quagmire that is ongoing censorship today?
Well, I think it all goes back to your basic underlying worldview. And if you depend upon yourself to protect yourself, you're going to be fearful of man, what he can do to you. If you fear God, you have a fountain of life, you have protection. And so those of you that were brought up in a Christian faith, maybe haven't continued in it, maybe you're kind of having a milk toasty sort of Christian guy or gal, get serious and trust God. The Bible says God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. So basically, what you've got to do is you've got to fear God and trust him and put your confidence in him. And I believe you need to read the Bible every day. You need to memorize passages of Scripture. You need to claim them and just say, God, protect me. There's a verse in Scripture that says, God command victories for us, push back our adversaries, trample on those who rise up against us, put to shame those who hate us, cause them to stumble and fall. These are break the cords of their iniquity. I pray these over those that are enemies of freedom. I pray that over them every day. I ask God would cause them to repent and turn, but if they won't, command victories for us. So you got to put your trust in God and ask him to give you the power, the courage. And courage it comes from the word coral, which means heart. It means It means really fight in the heart, courage. I've got determination. I'm bold. And you can be bold in that because, ultimately, all these things that we have, all your money, all your wealth, pretty cars, fancy, homes, nice clothes, nice practice. One day you're going to be gone and you're not going to be able to take it with you. So you ought to just stand up and stand up for what's right. Let me just tell you what, there's nothing more enjoyable than standing up for the truth that God would have you do and having him give you the courage to do it. Frankly, it's exhilarating.
You said we weren't created for a spirit, with a spirit and for a spirit of fear, nor were we created to be shackled. We were created with
to be free.
And to be free. These are not they're not separate. They are together. And Dr. Hotze, your career, your life in medicine, your life with your family, it has been consistent in that fight, which is why they have been so aggressive at all levels, not just once, but beginning in 2005 and even continuing today to try to take away your voice, your words, your influence. But Stephen, you have no fear because of your foundation. You have hope, and you will continue to fight for freedom. And I don't think your words will ever go away.
Well, thank you for that. My words may go away, but the word of God never fails. It never goes away. One day I'm going to be, there's a verse that says, Lord, make me to know my end, what is the extent of my days. Let me know how transient I am. My days are as a handbreadth in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. So help me conduct myself with wisdom during my short stay upon the earth. So I pray that frequently. And, I know who would have ever thought I'd be standing here at my age after all that I've gone through. And I still am. And God, I may die tomorrow, but whenever God's ready for me, but I will have not linger. I'm not going to linger. I'm going to be like my daddy. I'm not going to linger. I'm going to go. I want to be the night before I die. I hope I can say with my dad, my food hadn't tasted this good since I was a teenager. I hadn't felt this good. So that's the way to live your.
What did you say? You said a West Texan rattlesnake. I imagine that's how local, central government, all the medical boards, all the corporations, that's probably how they look at you. You're that West Texas rattlesnake, just waiting to
lay into them, man.
You're not waiting. You're on the attack. Well, Dr. Hotze, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for what you've done, but more what you continue to do and what you've built there at your practice there just outside of Houston. Where can people that are listening to this, of course, this will be in the show notes as well. Where can people find you?
Well, there's two places that you can look. One is you can go to the Hotze Health and Wellness Center. That's Hotze, and that's Hotze, HWC, Hotze Health and Wellness Center, Hotze, Hotzeh, as in horse, W as in horse, C as in cat.com. That's our website. Or for views about medicine and politics, you can go to C as in cat, RTX, news.com. C as in cat, RTX. That stands for Conservative Republicans of Texas News. CRTXnews.com for my newsletter that I publish on a weekly basis. And you can find newsletters there and all kinds of articles about medicine, about the COVID injection, about everything that's going on, and about current politics.
And your books are on Amazon, and you have a podcast there with your pharmacy.
You can at the podcast.
Wellness Revolution.
Podcast is Wellness Revolution. Or I guess I could go Dr. Hotze Podcast too.
Website.
On the website, you can go to our website, hotzehwc.com.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Hotze. As always, give your employees there. They're fantastic, by the way. I mean, he runs a wonderful, wonderful clinic there, health and wellness. And remember, The best answer to cancer is the immune system if you have cancer. But beyond that, the best answer to cancer is to never get it. And partnering yourself with people like Dr. Hotze, that's the best way for you to empower yourself to do what it's designed to do. That's to heal. It's to be well. And it's to never, never get disease. Remember, that word means literally the lack of wellness. Thank you for joining us on this Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. We need your help. Of course, share, like, and subscribe. Drop us a 5-star review and tell this to everybody out there. Provide the link, provide the website. That's www.pre-scribe.com. And you'll find us on all the social media as well. But drop us that 5-star review and share that with those that can benefit from this information, because we are going to empower more patients, more doctors to stand up and return doctors back to patients and patients to doctor, to restore the doctor-patient relationship. But censorship is in the way. There are those that would want to step in between that, but you can help to regain control of your health by understanding those that have stood up, like Dr. Hotze and others, and the sacrifices they made, but they set forth the platform to help you to get back control of your health and disease prevention. As always, I will see you on the next Prescribed podcast.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribed Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.